Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Melbourne Press Club. My name is Michael Rowland. I'm one of the Vice Presidents of the Melbourne Press Club for my sins. It's great to see you all here for what is going to be a really interesting and insightful event, care of our guest speaker, and please make him very welcome, the Chairman of the ACCC, Rod Sims. I'll more formally introduce Rod when he gets up to speak after we have a bite to eat in about 20 minutes or so, but it's not letting out a trade secret to let you know that this lunch sold out within days. We normally take a week or two to get rid of tickets, but such was the interest in Rod's and the ACCC's groundbreaking report on the tech giants that there was so much interest. So who knew you were so popular, Rod Sims? Although I have to say Google and Facebook send their apologies. I don't know why, but there you go. As I said, Rod will speak very shortly, but I do want to take this opportunity to thank all of our sponsors and supporters who make these events at the Press Club possible, starting off with our principal sponsors, Monash University, who is represented here today by Lee Dawson, as well as Virgin Australia. So we really appreciate the support of both of our principal sponsors. Our premium sponsors as well, Minter Ellison, represented here today by Jeff Carter. Jeff, great to see you. The Commonwealth Bank, Matt Keenan, flying the flag for the CBA today, thank you so much, and Crown Resorts. To our major media sponsors, the Herald Sun, The Age, Leader Newspapers, Channel 7, Channel 9, Channel 10, ABC, 3AW, AAP and Sky News. And to our other non-media major sponsors, Telstra, McPherson Kelly Lawyers and Australia Post. Please thank all of our sponsors. I'd also like to acknowledge, as part of our sponsors, Bruce Davidson, the Chief Executive of AAP, is with us. Thank you, Bruce. And I'm told Hugh Marks, the Chief Executive of Nine Entertainment, is on his way. He had very important duties in Sydney this morning. He was one of many media executives fronting up to the Press Freedom Inquiry, so flying the flag for all of us as journalists. So that's appreciated. Hugh will be joining us very shortly as well. So listen, please enjoy your meal. It'll be coming around very shortly, and as I said, I'll be back in about 20 minutes, half an hour or so, to do the formalities with Rod Sims. Bon appetit. Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention? Please keep eating. We'll get the show on the road. Can I firstly introduce, because he missed the first round of introductions, Hugh Marks, the Chief Executive of Nine Entertainment. So thank you so much for coming down, Hugh. And as I mentioned earlier, Hugh has been doing a very important job in defending press freedom this morning, which is very important to all of us. I, like all of you, am fascinated to hear from Rod Sims on the recently completed inquiry into Google, Facebook, and all the digital platforms, and hear, I guess, as realistically as we can, how tighter regulations can be applied on these tech giants and our privacy can be better preserved as we move increasingly into a digital world. To give you an indication of how big these giants are, and this was some of the information from Rod's report, each month 19.2 million Australians use Google search, 17.3 million use Facebook, 17.6 million watch YouTube, which is owned by Google, and 11.2 million use Instagram, which is owned by Facebook. So that right there is an indication of the challenge facing regulators as they try to look at where online advertising is going and try to, as much as they can, create a more level playing field as we move into the years and decades hence. Rod Sims has been chairman of the ACCC since August 2011. He was recently appointed to an unprecedented third term, which means by the time he finishes in 2022, he will have served 11 years. And I have to say, Rod, you get less for murder. You get far less for murder. Importantly, though, he has shown in his time at the helm of the ACCC his willingness to take on the biggest of the big. The ACCC has gone after, in various forms, banks, telcos, airlines, supermarkets. In fact, he says one of his most trickiest challenges in recent years, challenging in every respect, was the recent Nine takeover of Fairfax. And he's telling me just then it had something to do with really difficult chief executives on both sides of the, which I'm sure is not the case, both sides of the equation. Anyway, the merger takeover, call it what you will, went through. Rod Sims is here to speak about the inquiry, but most importantly, he is very, very keen to take your questions. So he'll speak for 20 minutes, half an hour or so, but please get those questions ready because he's keen to explain as much as possible where the ACCC stands and most importantly, what it wants from the government as now it takes up the recommendations and hopefully brings most of them to fruition. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the ACCC Chairman, Rod Sims.
Thanks very much, Michael, and look, please keep eating. I can never actually do these lunch speakers unless there's knives and forks going. It would throw me completely if they stopped. Look, firstly, I need to declare a few interests. I read the AFR and the Australian every day, and also other Nine and News Limited papers daily, but mainly the Age and the Herald Sun. Despite being a Sydney-sider, I, of course, need their combined coverage of the footy. You can sort of take the boy out of Lawn. Indeed, you can take him to Sydney, but you can't take Lawn or the footy out of the boy. I also get a daily news feed from the ABC. I have the Guardian app, which I use, and recently I've been reading stories in the rebooted Canberra Times, which I think is clever how they're trying to position themselves. I listen to both the ABC and Macquarie Radio because I do like a wide range of views, which you certainly get when you listen to both. I watch a wide range of television stations, but these days really only time for news and sport. I use Google many times a day, from Google Maps to help me to get here today, to learning more about Hawthorn's new debutante, which many people prefer to call CJ, which you'd understand if you saw his name written down. I'm not on Facebook, just not enough time, I'm afraid. But nearly all of the ACCC's digital platform team are Facebook users, and a good number of them are sitting in that middle table at the end there. I do use WhatsApp, particularly for the Hawthorn feed, but other users as well. And of course, the ACCC teams are on every bit of social media that moves. I do read think pieces from The Conversation, The Monthly and Crikey, and my media team have self-set KPIs to get me written up in BuzzFeed, Pedestrian TV and Junkie.com, which I'm told, because I wouldn't have a clue, they say they meet their KPIs. Look, all that said, thanks to the Melbourne Press Club for the invitation to speak today, and thank you all for turning up to listen. Clearly, digital platforms have changed fundamentally the way we interact with each other, as everyone here knows. There's no doubt they've brought enormous benefits, which I don't have to list, we all know that. But along with the benefits come a number of concerns, which have attracted the attention of people and governments all around the world. This led, of course, to our inquiry, which we started 18 months ago, well no, probably now 20 months ago. And of course I know you've all read the entire 600 pages of our final report. I have to say, in signing it off, it took me about a week to read it, and I'd read every chapter 4 or 5 times before then, so good luck with your reading. Our inquiry found that Facebook and Google have substantial market power in a number of markets, and with this comes greater responsibility and greater scrutiny. As they grow and expand into adjacent markets, they increasingly have the ability and the incentive to favour their own business interests or their own businesses. So there's clearly competition issues. There's also consumer issues surrounding digital platforms, for example, about what Australians know, how well informed they are, whether they're being misled about the use of their data, or whether their data is indeed being misused. Then, of course, you've got the impact of Google and Facebook on news and journalism, which is probably why you're all here today, which was a particular focus of our inquiry and our terms of reference. The digital platform inquiry has, I think, uniquely allowed us to consider the linkages between the critical issues of substantial market power and competition, consumer issues, privacy issues, media issues and advertising. And it's that the ability for us to look widely is what differentiates our study from the many more narrower ones that have already been conducted around the world. So look, today I'm going to talk a bit about the problems, a bit about the media market, and a bit about our recommendations. And then, as Michael said, I'm very keen to take questions. So Michael's already mentioned the amount of times, just how comprehensive, how prominent Google and Facebook are, so I won't repeat that information. The important thing to understand, which you wouldn't know from talking to them, is that Google and Facebook particularly are not community-based, not-for-profit companies, no matter how much they seek to portray themselves that way. Seriously, I don't know whether you had that discussion, but you would not know they were commercial businesses if you talk to them. While they do provide a lot of services at zero monetary cost, like any other successful public company, their success is measured in shareholder returns. Digital platforms, they're reliant on anticipated revenue growth from monetising consumer attention and monetising data. And they need to continually to grow. If you look at the stock exchange valuations, 65 to 80% of Facebook's current share price is based on future earnings, and 40 to 60% of Google's share price is based on future earnings, meaning if their profits stayed flat, their share price would nosedive. And of course, they don't want that to happen. So not only does the share market think their market power and growth is going to continue, but they have a desperate need for growth, otherwise their share price plummets. Now, there's nothing wrong with seeking growth. We want businesses to grow by providing more profitable services to users. And there's nothing in Australian competition law that stops firms possessing a substantial degree of market power. It doesn't prohibit people having it. It doesn't prohibit a firm from outcompeting its rivals by better efficiency, better strategy, better technology. There's nothing wrong with that. Where the law steps in is where dominant firms seek to handicap their rivals. Now, the dominance of Google and Facebook has meant that many businesses rely on their services to reach consumers. Such businesses are potentially exposed, or definitely exposed, given the ability and the incentive of digital platforms to favour either their own businesses or related businesses. And the lack of transparency makes these issues all the more compelling. So Google and Facebook try very strongly to position themselves as dumb pipes. We've just created the platform. What happens on the platform is nothing to do with us. But this portrayal is contradicted by their need to capture and monetise increasing amounts of user attention and data so they can keep growing. So there's already been action taken against them overseas. In March this year, the European Commission fined Google €1.5 billion. Don't you love those numbers, 1.5 billion? What a contribution to the Australian Treasury we could make. I'm working on it, Josh, working on it. Anyway, for abusing their dominant position by forcing customers of its AdSense business to sign contracts stating they wouldn't accept advertising from rival search engines. And the EC's Competition Commissioner, when announcing the decision, said that their conduct denied other companies the possibility to compete on their merits and to innovate, quote unquote. Last month, of course, we saw the Federal Trade Commission announce a $5 billion, another lovely number, penalty for consumer privacy violations in relation to the Cambridge Analytical issues, which everybody here, I'm sure, is familiar. And we have found that the current regulatory frameworks governing media, communications and advertising result in a significant regulatory imbalance between media and the platforms. While we don't consider the functions of digital platforms and news media businesses to be comparable in all cases, where digital platforms and media businesses are performing comparable functions, they should be regulated in a similar way. And yet they're not, by a long way. One sector's regulated, the other one's not. The collection of user data is central to the business model of Facebook and Google. It allows them to offer highly targeted and highly personalised opportunities to advertisers. The breadth and scale of user data collected by Google and Facebook is relevant to both the assessment of their market power and to user concerns. Now, as I've said, we all benefit from the free services, and I think consumers now have some understanding that because when Google and Facebook started, I don't think consumers actually understood what was going on. This was free services, it was fantastic. I think they're gradually getting some understanding that they are paying with their data to help advertising to them. But we have found through our surveys that few consumers understand fully, and certainly can't control, how their data is collected, used and shared when they sign up for the services. There are vague, long, complex, difficult to analyse privacy policies. A recent person just wrote up trying to translate the Google Facebook privacy policies into what you'd say if you're advertising food, just to make the parallel, and it was hilarious in terms of the vagueness and really conveying no information whatsoever, and that's what you see when you look at their privacy policies. Importantly, research from the ACCC inquiry showed that around 80% of digital platform users considered that using their online behaviour to create digital platforms, creating online profiles of them and separately sharing their personal information with an unknown third party, 80% of consumers approximately considered that to be a misuse of their personal information. Now, there's a wide variety of views from people about data. Some people don't care, some people are outraged. And frankly, I meet more of the second than of the first. But different people have different views. Now, the digital platforms collect a vast amount of information from ever-expanding sources, from countless third-party apps, and they've got significant discretion over how this data is used and disclosed to other businesses. Consumers relinquish considerable control over how their uploaded content is used and indeed owned by digital platforms, usually without realising it. And of course, you sign up for bundled agreements with take it or leave it terms that limit your choice and control. So let's just look at my second topic, the impact on media. And the government's terms of reference require that we have a particular focus on the media. Clearly, society benefits, and I don't need to tell this audience, from citizens who are able to make well-informed economic, social and political decisions. I'm a very strong believer in the role that news and journalism plays in being a journal of public record, as well as keeping society informed through the production and dissemination of news. As important, we need a plurality of voices. There's great civic value in stories that expose corruption and hold governments, institutions like the ACCC and other decision makers to account. Journalism is a classic public good. You may not have thought about yourselves as a public good, but I'm sorry, you're a public good. In the sense that people benefit from what you do, whether they pay for it, whether they read it, whether they see your content, because you play a wider role in society. You help benefit society broadly, even if each individual is not looking at what you do. Successive governments, both here and overseas, recognise this. And what they recognise is when it's a public good, it's going to be underprovided if you just leave it to the market. That's what follows from being a public good, given that there's benefits beyond what people are willing to pay for. So in Australia and overseas, governments support journalism in various ways, some directly, some indirectly through the tax system. And certainly certainly, of course, you have to acknowledge that the digital platforms have brought benefits to journalism. It's easier to get information, it's easier to disseminate it. it has lowered the cost of producing and distributing online content. And it's also assisted the entry of smaller scale digital native news producers, which previously couldn't have been able to exist given the traditional costs of entry. It's also clear how interlinked the media and advertising are. They're really two sides of the same coin. The media depends on being able to advertise. The reduction in advertising revenue flowing to media businesses over the last 20 years has been enormous, in part due to the rise of digital platforms, their success in attracting advertising expenditure, and the impact they've also had in reducing the ability of media businesses to invest in journalism, particularly at the local level. The print media, either print or online, has been the most significantly affected. There's been a decline in classified advertising revenue from 2001 to 2016 from $3.7 billion in 2001 to $225 in 2016 once you adjust for inflation. So 3.7 billion down to 2.25. That is a massive revenue loss for businesses, which of course has a profound effect. And it's had a different effect on different types of news and journalism, with local government, local court reporting, local journalism most affected, not all journalism affected. We've recorded the closure of 106 local and regional newspapers across Australia between 2008 and 2018. And this type of reporting, the local reporting, is much more often funded purely by advertising, so it's disproportionately affected. And we're also got to the point where many media businesses are now reliant on digital platforms like particularly Google for referrals to their websites. It's because of their role as the gateways to Australian consumers that media businesses have legitimate concerns with the practices of the digital platforms. Things like a lack of transparency in the ranking of news content, ranking algorithms that don't recognise original news, which makes it hard to monetise it, which unfairly treat content that sits behind a paywall, people trying to get subscriptions, that restrict the type of advertising available in certain formats. Of course, we had the impact of policies such as first click free and the impact of so-called snippets on traffic that actually flows through to media websites. In addition, and I think this is really important, is the atomization of news. It's in the interests of Google and Facebook to be the source of your news and to atomise it. We'll give you news from any source. You don't need to know where it's from. In fact, they'd probably prefer you didn't, so that the source of your news is Google and Facebook. And that makes it very difficult for brands to establish themselves and benefit from the stories they're writing and journalism they're producing. And of course, you've got the problem with stories that are only of interest to a small number of users. That's always, of course, been a problem, but the more it's being spread through global platforms, the bigger that problem is. I think it's not surprising that the decline of the more recognised media brands, in particular their editorial and advertising processes, has paralleled the rise of more disinformation or fake news. And it's little wonder that consumer trust in media is at record low levels over the last decade and sliding. I think there's a real link between the two. Our research showed that around 92% of respondents to an ACCC news survey had some concern about the quality of news and journalism they were consuming, particularly when they do that via social media or over the internet. Now, it's very important to recognise that digital platforms have not replaced media businesses as creators or producers of news, and certainly not as creators or producers of journalism. If they had, this might just be what's termed creative destruction. the Kodak being replaced by digital cameras. But we're not talking that. We're not talking a better product. We're talking about one product, in a sense, displacing another without actually replacing it. And what we lose is journalism in the medium and media on the way through. And that is really a fundamental point. 50% of the traffic to Australian news media websites comes from Google and Facebook. Therefore, these platforms have a critical influence over what news and journalism Australians do and don't see. Now, let me just turn to the recommendations. So we came up with 23 recommendations, all of which are important. I'm going to particularly touch on the ones that affect media businesses, but I'll touch on a couple of others briefly. The first one is we think it's crucial, and this is probably the most important media recommendation, that the government addresses the bargaining imbalance that exists between digital platforms and media companies, which represents a classic economic market failure. And this is a vital reform. The bargaining imbalance comes about because Google and Facebook don't need any particular media organisation, but every media organisation needs Google and Facebook. And so they're unavoidable business partners. Now, recently I have seen that a number of Australian television broadcasters signed a deal to provide content to Facebook. I honestly don't know whether that's a sign of greater cooperation or an early response to our recommendations in relation to the bargaining code. But I think it could be a bit of the latter and shows the importance of having that bargaining code. The code will cover sharing of data, understanding elements of our algorithm outcomes, not inappropriately impeding monetisation and overall value sharing. And the important thing to understand is the platforms would be required to submit an acceptable code to the regulator, the ACMA, within 9 months. If they fail to do so, the ACMA could impose a mandatory standard which would be enforceable, and there would be large penalties for non-compliance. So that's the main media-related recommendation. Second, we've recommended the development of a harmonised media regulatory framework to level the playing field so that like entities are regulated in a like way. And that's also a very important recommendation. Third, we suggested the creation of a permanent specialist digital platforms branch within the ACCC, and I'm always conscious when you're a regulator or an organisation and you recommend something happens in your own organisation, but nonetheless, I passionately think this is the right recommendation. Its role would be to proactively monitor, that is, not wait for things to come at us over the hill, but proactively get out there with proactive information gathering powers, look for anti-competitive or anti-consumer conduct, investigate these, but also provide a continuing stream of information, just as we've done with our report, the 600 pages, which you've all read, that there would be a continuing flow of information every 6 months about what's going on in this area so that government can not only get up to date, but stay up to date with what's going on. And the Treasurer has already endorsed the establishment of this branch, which will see the deep skills and knowledge we've gained put into full effect. Now, to ensure the branch is even more effective, we're recommending that unfair contract terms be made illegal and that a new unfair practices provision be inserted into consumer law. And this is actually really important because it will go to the heart of the business model of the digital platforms, because there's behaviour they're doing which is not necessarily anti-competitive and it doesn't mislead, but it brings great detriment. I'm happy to provide examples if someone wants to ask me a question later. So the consumer law changes. So we're not actually recommending really many changes to the competition law. We're recommending changes to the consumer law, and really never doubt the competition or wider implications of effective consumer laws. We often get styled the competition regulator. We are the consumer and competition regulator. As I mentioned, the branch would provide regular public reports. And it would continue, as I say, to give government the evidence base to stay ahead of these issues. We may make recommendations to government. We've made them now, 23 recommendations. We may keep making recommendations every 6 months to stay ahead of these issues. Now, fourth, we've recommended targeted funding for local journalism, including local news in regional areas. Of course, we realise the ABC serves those areas well, but it's vital we have a plurality of views, both commercial media and ABC serving regional areas. Fifth, we've recommended that tax settings be amended to establish new categories of charitable purposes and digital deductible gift recipient status for non-profit organisations that can promote and assist the production of public interest journalism. And there is increasing philanthropy going towards journalism in Australia, and we want to make sure that continues. Sixth, and very important, we've recommended enforceable codes to deal with copyright enforcement. Secondly, how disinformation is handled by digital platforms, and also the creation of an ombudsman scheme to resolve business and consumer complaints. And these are important recommendations that go to different aspects of the platform businesses. And finally, we've recommended changes to the Privacy Act, which is administered by the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. We've also recommended a statutory tort for serious invasions of privacy. And we think updating privacy laws is crucial, because if we're going to benefit from the innovations that data can give us, we've got to have consumer trust in that data. And unless we get ahead of the game, that trust will be gone and the benefits will be gone. Let me make a couple of just final remarks, and I'm conscious of time. I think we should all be concerned that the existing regulatory frameworks for the collection and use of data have not held up well to the challenges of digitalisation, and I really think everybody would agree with that. Nor have they appropriately responded to the incentives created by the supply of targeted advertising that relies on the monetisation of consumer data and attention. I think the key point is we are behind. Data issues can, for example, affect the growth in scams and identity theft, as well as targeting individuals to buy goods at times of perceived weakness or at inflated prices they know you individually will pay. They can work out how much you will pay for a particular good, or they can provide sellers with information that can allow discrimination between buyers on the basis of income or health. And then, of course, you've got the Cambridge Analytical revelations, which shows how data, in combination with access to a large number of citizens, can wield political influence and affect the electoral process. I think citizens will and should demand that governments stay ahead of these issues. So, as I say, our inquiry was very broad. We welcome the discussion it's provoked. We think our recommendations have got it right. I've met somebody recently who said that they thought our final recommendations were weaker than our draft recommendations. That's not so. The final recommendations were stronger than the draft recommendations. I'm happy to go through that for anybody who wants it. And I don't want people to underestimate the power of what we've recommended to be put in place now. So we've recommended things that deal with the problems now. Here's the problem, here's the solution. But we're also recommending a continuing flow of information so that governments can stay ahead of the matters. Now, just let me make a couple of final points. I've heard people say, what do these court cases matter? High penalties, doesn't matter. But when you have these cases, they're way more important than the penalties, because once you've been found to breach a law, it's very difficult for the digital platform to continue with that behaviour. And we at the ACCC have got, out of this inquiry, got 5 active investigations in relation to Google and Facebook that we would not have been aware of had we not been doing the work. And that proactive look in the future is going to yield more. Second, I've heard people say, well, what's a code of conduct? That's a wet lettuce leaf. And look, some of them are. You think about the food and grocery code of conduct. If you breach it, there's no penalties. Now, that's just a ridiculous state of affairs. Regulations and laws without consequences for breaching them is what erodes people's trust in government. The codes we've recommended are, as we've recommended them, and must be binding, legally enforceable, and with meaningful penalties for breaching them. If you don't have those three things, then I agree they're useless. But the way we've recommended them, they're not. They're very powerful. Finally, I think it's worth saying Australia can act alone. Facebook and Google are clearly subject to our laws. They either comply with our laws or they don't do business in Australia. In the past, Facebook and Google have threatened to withdraw services from a country in response to local laws. I don't think this will happen here. Not only are our measures carefully calibrated, but we're closely in touch with our overseas counterparts who are sympathetic to both the issues we've raised and the solutions we've put forward. On the other hand, some argue that increasing regulation in digital markets will stifle innovation. I don't have any time for that argument. It fails to recognise that digital innovations have the potential to transform societies for the better, of course, but there's forms of innovation that can be harmful. Fake news, promotion of extremist content online, just one of many examples. So we need thoughtful regulatory frameworks so we can benefit from innovation, not suffer from it. Thank you very much. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Rod, for that great explanation of your report, particularly identifying the various challenges facing the Australian media industry. So please, yes, we've got half an hour for questions. Please raise your hand. There's a roving microphone at the back of the room. Margaret Simons, and as that microphone is taken to Margaret, I'll jump in with one first. You spoke about the tie-ups between various news organisations and Facebook. 9, 7, 10 all have various forms of Facebook news bulletins. Do you expect to see more of that, and would you like to see the Googles and the Facebooks pay more in the way of, I guess, carriage fees, given they source a lot of their content from other media organisations?
I think that the... sorry, I got just the carriage fees was the first one. What was the
You expect to see more of the Facebook media organisation tie-ups?
I do expect to see more of it, but if and only if the bargaining code gets introduced. I think if we were to wander out of the scene and our recommendations were to be thrown over the left shoulder, I don't think you'd see many more of that. Now, I could be wrong, but that's my judgment. So I think the bargaining code is crucial to get more of those arrangements and to make them more equitable. In terms of carriage fees, some have suggested we should have imposed those, but the trouble is it's too difficult. You can't do that. You can't do that in a vacuum. You've got to have the bargaining between the media companies and the platforms, and then the regulator can sit there and listen to both sides and see how the bargain goes and then adjudicate. But you can't do it up front. You've got to do it as a result of that bargaining.
Margaret Simons.
Margaret Simons from Monash University and the Public Interest Journalism Initiative. Congratulations on your report. It should be an agenda setter. 2 questions. You considered but put to one side the idea of tax rebates or tax favourable treatment for investment in public interest journalism. In a report that was largely buttressed by research, including original research, there seemed to be very little behind your decision to set that aside. I was wondering if you could talk to that. Secondly, you are, I think, the third, maybe the fourth major inquiry that has recommended a complete reform of media regulation in the last 20 years. The others have all been completely ignored. What hope do you have that yours won't be?
So I guess the one... We had recommendations in our draft report and we had areas that we'd further look at, including tax deductibility for subscriptions. When we looked at it more closely... Tax rebates for investment in public interest. Oh, I see. Sorry, you're right, I misheard. I'm over here and you're over there. I think we felt that, where we came out on that is providing, and I'll get back to answer your question directly, but providing direct grants to assist local journalism, because we felt that was the issue, The idea of rebates, we felt that we'd rather what limited money was likely to be allocated to go to where we saw the biggest problem, which was local journalism. And of course, you've got to be careful with tax rebates for local public interest journalism. I guess issues of how you define that. But the main point was we wanted to channel the money into local journalism. We felt that was where the biggest issue was. We felt if you're going to help the major media companies, then the bargaining code was the better way to do that. So in a sense, we've strengthened the bargaining code so that existing media players can bargain for a better deal and therefore look after themselves. And then once that's done, where's the gap? The gap's in local journalism. So that's how we got there. And in terms of other calls for media reform, I think we've now got a burning platform, though. I think that's the difference. Before, it's been sensible to do it. There's been reason, but there hasn't been a burning bridge that forced governments to act. I think now there's a bit of a burning bridge, so I think they will act. Exactly where they'll go, I don't know. I mean, it's a complex issue, as you know very well, but I think they'll have to do something. It's now an intolerable position.
Yeah, Michael Batchelor.
Rod, Michael Batchelard from the Age. Thank you for the talk today and for the review. It's really interesting. Just wanted to ask about something slightly different. And recently we had a decision in the federal court saying that media companies are yet again liable for things that are written about them or to them, if you like, on Facebook in the comments section of our sites. And the judgment in that case was very unsympathetic to the commercial media. You make all this money. At least you can cut out every single comment and then moderate them. It seems to be an approach that comes from an earlier era when we did have a lot of money, and we get that from the courts quite a lot in defamation cases and suppression order cases and so on. So I guess there's two questions. One, and the main one, it didn't seem to occur to anyone in that case that Facebook was a publisher or anything other than just a kind of transparent medium through which readers spoke to journalists and media organisations who are then liable for the defamation. And the second thing is, do the courts need to wake up to the new reality?
You're asking me to tell courts what to do in my business?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
That's pretty tricky, since we're in front of them just about every day of the week. Look, I think the key issue, my take from that case was immediately the same one I think you were getting at, which is they're saying, why don't the media companies do something without any reference to the fact that Facebook and Google should do something. And they've built their whole business system, and I know I'm perhaps exaggerating to make a point, but on the basis of having no responsibility. And it's interesting, we took action against Uber recently, and this is a bit of an aside, but it illustrates the point really well. Uber had contracts with restaurants that said in the contract that the restaurants were responsible for the delivery of the food. Clearly that had nothing to do with the restaurants. Uber directly contracted with individuals, but it just shows the mindset of setting up a platform where you've got the platform, you make the money, but you don't want any responsibility attaching to it. And this whole issue, which I've had many times, why are we responsible for what happens on our platforms? Well, you created the platform, you control the algorithm which drives the platform, you make a proverbial truckload of money out of this business, who else is responsible? So I think at its heart that case did show that the issue of responsibility has got to be dealt with. And I think the thrust of our recommendations is trying to put a whole lot more responsibility back onto the digital platforms. I'll leave the courts aside, sorry.
Last chance. No. Yes, there's a microphone at the back of the room. Please raise your hand if you have any questions. I want to, while we wait for other questions, go to that recommendation on some form of taxpayer help for local journalism. You talked about the more than 100 titles that have closed over a period of a decade. And I think in the report as well, you revealed that there are, correct me if I'm wrong, 21 local government areas in Australia that have no single local newspaper, which I find terrifying in terms of lack of accountability, lack of scrutiny for local councils, developers, property deals and the like. How would taxpayer support for local journalism, in your view, in an ideal world, work practically?
Oh, I think you'd have a panel of experts who would be separate from government, looking at the need across various local government areas, which could be both the outer suburban areas or regional and rural areas, and working out where that need is. And they'd have to make that judgment. You'd actually empower them to do it. Whether the $50 million a year we've recommended is enough to do it, I don't know. You'd have to suck it and see. But if you think about what governments spend money on, I mean, they're spending money on things that are really public goods, that are really important to society. And so I can't say it any better than you've said it. You want to have journalism in all these areas, particularly for development proposals, court cases, local government, all of that. It's essential to a well-functioning democracy.
Question at the back, yeah.
Thanks, Rod. Patrick Durkin from the Fin Review. You mentioned that some people thought the final report could have been tougher, including the idea of having a new external regulator. What you flagged that's an issue. What's your response to that?
Well, thanks, Patrick, for that. So 2 points. One is we said in the draft report that there needs to be a regulator playing particular roles, and we said quite explicitly that could either be a new regulator or an existing regulator. That's almost word for word the way we put it. I think it's fair to say, I could be wrong, but all submissions said it should be the existing regulators, meaning us, ACMA and the Privacy Commissioner. I don't think there was any one of the submissions from a wide range of interested parties, particularly media organisations and a whole lot of others, who wanted a standalone digital platform regulator. The problem is the media, in the run-up to the release of the final report, started saying we were going to recommend a standalone regulator, and when we did, there was somehow a disappointment, which I don't know where that came from. So, no, that was a decision we left open, which we made in the final report, completely following the submissions we had. But we have strengthened the final report. The bargaining code that we've got in the media is much strengthened than what was there before. Having an ombudsman which can make binding resolutions on complaints is much stronger than before. There's a whole range of recommendations that are both toughened up and clarified from where we were in the draft.
Questions? We'll go here first. Kathy Boland, then we'll go back to Margaret. In the interim, you had a recommendation there talking about the importance of stable and adequate funding for the ABC. Tell us more about that one. That's called a Dorothy Dixer.
Well, I'm not sure. Dorothy Dix is usually the benefit of the person answering the question.
I'm turning that concept around.
Yeah, good. Oh, look, the terms of reference was about the impact of digital platforms on media. We then started thinking about media, arriving at the conclusion that journalism, media is a public good. That then, obviously, that is the justification for the funding of the ABC and the SBS. And so we felt it was important that, when you sit and look at the framework government's got in place, that seems an appropriate framework. There's various countries that do fund public broadcasters and various countries that don't. But we felt that was a good model and that it should continue, and that's where that recommendation came from.
Thank you, Rod. Kathy, yes.
Hello, Rod. Kathy Boland, formerly ABC, so I'm interested in your answers to that one. Also, currently with the Financial Complaints Authority. Mm-hmm. I'm probably not alone in the room in having read media reports of your report with great delight, but never having actually read the report. So listening to you now...
You can't trust the media. No.
It depends which media you're listening to.
Yeah.
The thing that I was interested in was your point around privacy. I'm sure I'm not alone in having accepted blithely the privacy conditions that allow me to do whatever it is I'm trying to do on social without having read them at all. So you've made the observation, which is very true. I'm wondering what we can do about that across Australia. Is it regulation? Is it legislation? What's needed to fix that?
couple of things. Firstly, we've got to change the privacy laws. They've come out of a different era, both before internet digitalisation, but also at a time when people felt principle-based laws were the right way to go. I don't think principle-based laws work in this environment. I think they've got to be a lot more explicit about what you can and can't do, so we need to revamp the Privacy Act. We also need to increase the consequences for invasions of privacy, so allowing individuals to take action under the Privacy Act, which they can't now, having a statutory tort for damaging people's privacy. I think our unfair practices suggestion also goes to how data's used. So you want upfront to better protect rights, much clearer consent, much clearer transparency about so that you absolutely know what's happening to your data, the right to erase your data. So a lot of those changes, plus implications if it's misused. So it's a very broad front we have to go on. We are coming from a long way back in terms of where we need to be on privacy.
Meg, again.
Thank you, and thanks for the second bite of the cherry. Why isn't it possible to design a system of tax rebates that targets local journalism? On your own figures in the report, I think you said it would bring in 150 million, and correct me if I'm wrong, compared to the 50 million that you're recommending in grants. I don't really understand, again, why you've set that aside so lightly. Secondly, you talk about stable and adequate funding for the public broadcasters. You don't say what that is, but of course at the moment the public broadcasters are asking for funding to be on a 5-year timetable rather than the current triennial. Do you support that idea of 5-year rounds of funding?
Yeah, look, going to the two questions there, obviously. Going to the tax rebates, we felt at the end of the day that it was better to target what's going to be limited money to where we judge the biggest need to be, which was outer metropolitan, regional, local journalism. See where that is missing and address your money towards that. If you just have a tax rebate to public interest journalism, that could go anywhere, and some of the publications, of course, don't make a profit or much profit at all. So better to support them so they can exist the idea was to much better target what the problem was. It's really the same dollars after all, it's just a different way, a more targeted way of doing it. Look, in terms of the amounts of money to the ABC, we felt it was entirely appropriate to point out the importance of the role that the ABC and SBS play in journalism, addressing the underfunding that would otherwise, I think, clearly occur. So it's got a crucial role to play. We felt that should be recognised, highlighted, but look, we haven't done the work to work out what that level of funding should be. So I think we've roamed fairly broadly, getting into the details of the funding of the ABC, probably beyond what even we could get into. Thanks.
You're welcome to have a look.
Yeah, I figured you'd say that.
Yes, sir.
G'day Rod, Lee Dawson from Monash University's media team. Thank you very much for that enlightening speech today. Just a couple of questions for me, and I do apologise if you said this and I missed it, but how much investment from Australia and Australian media do Facebook and Google receive on an annual basis, and what funds, if any, does Australia receive or Australian media receive as a result? And furthermore, what are other countries around the world doing to target the monopolisation of online content from Google and Facebook? You can extend the branch to Weibo in China as well, and what they're doing in terms of, I guess, having that total market share over a billion people in China as well.
Sorry, so what was the second question? So what are they doing?
So what are other countries around the world doing to target this monopolisation of online content?
Yeah, look, my answers aren't going to be very satisfactory to the first point. We have got a lot of information from Facebook and Google about how much they're spending. That's the beauty of those information gathering notices, that if ever you've received them, they're good fun to receive. But the information we've kept confidential. We've made judgments about what we should share and what we haven't shared, and so we haven't made that information public. And also it's, of course, sensitive for Google and Facebook and sensitive for the media companies involved, so can't help much there. Look, other countries I think the main focus of other countries is very much around competition law. The EC has taken a number of cases dealing with various particular competition issues. The United States has now set up units in their two competition agencies to look at proactive enforcement. I think the UK will do the same thing. So they're all doing that. I think what we want to do that's over and above that is not only do the proactive enforcement on competition matters, but also do it on consumer matters. And I think that's really, in the whole world debate, and a point I'm hammering overseas and will keep hammering, is don't just look at this as a competition issue, it's a consumer issue. And really at the heart of the digital platform's business model is at least as much to do with consumer issues in terms of, are consumers misled? Do they know what's going on? What rights have they got to control their data? Have they got a contract that's ultimately fair? That affects their behaviour a lot more. So we'll be doing, this unit will be both competition and consumer, and that will make it unique in the world, but it will also make continuing recommendations to government, and that will make it unique. So if we see a problem over there that's not dealt with by competition and consumer law, we'll recommend governments deal with it. So in a sense, that recommendation to keep that branch going, many of which are sitting over there, is to keep this inquiry going in many sense, but it moves into investigation, enforcement, which it hasn't been focused on before, but it'll keep up that monitoring and reporting to government.
Just about out of time. We've got time for one, maybe two more questions. It's over to you.
Hi Rod, Claire from Nine. I was very curious to see the code would be administered by ACMA. We're hoping you're just being polite. Would the ACCC be adverse to actually, if the government does recommend the ACCC oversee the code, given it's more a competition issue?
Look, we felt that you've got an Australian Media and Communications Authority, that's what the M in ACMA stands for. We felt it was within their remit, as I suppose slightly suggested by your question, having been embarrassed about mentioning our recommendation to have a branch in the ACCC. We are a little sensitive to recommending too many things that come our way, but the bigger point is they are set up as the media regulator, and so we felt it's a role for them. So look, it's now in the hands of government, but we thought about it a lot, and we felt they were set up with the right skills to do that.
Can I just follow up? Should you actually be given that role, do you think that this new division could do that?
We have put our recommendations out, I'm afraid. We thought about it very carefully, and we thought that was the appropriate division of responsibilities.
I'll ask the final question. It's a practical question as well. One of the columnists in the Australian, from memory, on the day after the report came out, likened the ACCC to a tiny mosquito trying to cause pain to two 900-kilogram buffaloes in the form of Google and Facebook. Realistically, even if the government did act on most, if not all, of the recommendations, what would that do to change not so much the operating practices, but the culture, the values globally of these tech giants?
Look, a couple of answers to that if I could. One is, we've taken Ford, Heinz, Apple, Visa, a whole range of companies to court, so we're not concerned about dealing with multinationals. That's, in a sense, what we do every day of the week. I think the recommendations, as I say, they're doing business in Australia. There's just no doubt about that. They're therefore caught by Australian laws, they're caught by our competition laws, they're caught by our consumer laws. So what happens here will be watched very closely overseas. I was with, in May, all my equivalent competition agency heads, and we had a couple of hours chat about this topic, and they are looking at a range of things, to be fair, but also all looking at what we're doing here. So, and we're talking to them so that we share experiences. So I think what we've got in place here can be done. I'm hoping it will be done, and it will affect how they do things. But also I'm confident that other countries are moving as well. And we are very closely aligned with both our fellow competition and consumer regulators, the privacy commissioners linked to their people, ACMA's linked to equivalent agencies. So I just think this is, we will, we've now finished that report. We're going to keep advocating for that report. We're going to do it both domestically and we're going to do it internationally. So we'll be constantly out there, and part of the key roles of the branch is to keep talking to their international counterparts to make sure that we're advocating for what we think should happen here. We're also suggesting it happen overseas.
Rod Sims, congratulations on the work the ACCC has done so far. We all await with great interest how the government does respond to it. Thank you for a great speech and thank you for being very candid in your answers. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Rod Sims. That's where we finish the lunch. Thank you so much for coming. A particular thank you to our media executives, Hugh Marks from Nine and Bruce Davidson from AOP, for coming down from Australia's second most important city to the Melbourne Press Club for the lunch today. Your presence is greatly appreciated. Thank you all for coming. Have a fabulous day and we'll see you all at the next Melbourne Press Club function. See you later.